The morning sun hit the courthouse in Phoenix like a torch, turning the glass walls into sheets of fire. I stood outside the entrance, staring at the reflection of the sky in the polished windows. The heat was sharp even for Arizona. My palms were damp. My fingers wouldn't stay still. I wasn't scared, not exactly. It was something heavier. The kind of weight that comes when you know what you're about to do will change everything. I was 32 years old, and I was about to sue my own father. The business that brought me here had started with my mother. She built it in the late 90s with no capital, no partners, and no safety net. Just skill, stubbornness, and a willingness to work longer hours than anyone else. It began as a tiny fabric supply outlet in a rented warehouse on the outskirts of Tucson. Within a decade, it was a major player, supplying high-end textiles to boutique hotels, restaurants, and interior designers across the Southwest. She called it Marisol Textiles after her grandmother. Everyone in the industry knew her name. When she died 3 years ago, she left behind a detailed will. Half the company went to me, the other half to my father, Gregory. Her will was specific. We were to manage the business together as partners to protect what she had built. That partnership lasted half a year. Gregory was charming in the way that only practiced liars are. My mother used to call him her silver-tongued devil, always with a laugh, as if it were a compliment. She never saw the warning in her own words. During their marriage, he worked in sales, traveling constantly. He would return with gifts, stories, and a smile that could melt through guilt. My mother handled the day-to-day business, the operations, the growth. He simply enjoyed the life her success provided. After her death, Gregory moved into her office as if he had earned it. Within weeks, the company started to change. He replaced my mother's old team with his own people, including a woman named Veronica, a girlfriend who looked young enough to be his daughter. He gave her a senior management title, though she couldn't tell silk from polyester. Soon, he began making unilateral decisions. Long-term contracts with trusted suppliers were canceled. New partnerships appeared overnight, most of them with his personal contacts. He began funneling company money into side projects that had nothing to do with textiles. He called it diversification. I called it what it was: misuse of company assets. I tried to stop the slide. I scheduled meetings, prepared financial analyses, and presented data showing exactly how his moves were hurting profitability. He would smile, nod, pretend to listen, then go right back to doing whatever he wanted. 8 months ago, I found out what he had really been up to. An accountant I trusted sent me an anonymous email. Attached were loan documents worth several $100,000, taken out against company assets. My name and signature appeared on them. I never signed those papers. Gregory had forged my approval to secure the loan. When I confronted him, he laughed in my face. "You think you understand business because your mother left you a few papers?" he said, standing in the office that should have been half mine. "I've been making deals since before you could walk. This company needs real leadership, not a girl pretending to fill her mother's shoes." That was the moment I understood what he planned. He was going to take everything: the company, the legacy, the story, and he was going to do it with a smile. I hired a lawyer. His name was Douglas. He came recommended by a close friend who had gone through a brutal partnership dissolution. Douglas was sharp, calm, and thorough. When I handed him the documents, he spent an entire weekend reviewing them. On Monday morning, he called me and said 3 words that gave me the first sense of relief I'd felt in months: "You can win." The will was clear. The forged documents were undeniable. The business records were in my favor. We filed the lawsuit 3 months later. Gregory's response was aggressive. He hired an entire legal team from one of the biggest firms in the state. Within weeks, they launched a counterattack, accusing me of being mentally unstable, of stealing funds, of trying to ruin the company for personal gain. They sent letters to suppliers, clients, and even employees, questioning my competence. It was a smear campaign, and it worked. A few contracts were lost. A few employees resigned. But I held my ground. The case moved faster than I expected. Gregory's lawyers pushed for an early trial, confident they could crush me quickly. Douglas didn't understand their confidence. until he learned who the presiding judge was, Judge Harrison Whitmore. He had been my father's golf partner for nearly 30 years. They vacationed together. Their families had shared dinners for decades. I remembered him from when I was a child. He used to bring me chocolate bars when he visited our house. Douglas immediately filed a motion requesting the judge's recusal. The conflict of interest was obvious, but the motion was denied. Judge Whitmore stated that his friendship with Gregory would not influence his impartiality. When Douglas told me, I felt my stomach drop. I had always believed that justice was impartial, that the truth would eventually win. But that belief started to crack. Douglas urged me to stay calm. He said we still had the facts. We had documentation, witnesses, emails, contracts. Even a biased judge, he said, couldn't ignore evidence this solid. I wanted to believe that. I needed to. Now, standing outside the courthouse, watching the crowd of lawyers and clients move past me, I realized that I might lose everything. Not just the company, but the story of my mother's life's work. I took a slow breath, straightened my jacket, and walked inside. The courtroom wasn't like the ones on television. There was no grandeur, no dramatic lighting. Just a small, functional space lined with wood paneling that smelled faintly of polish and dust. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The judge's bench stood raised at the front, a symbol of quiet authority. To the right was the witness stand. 2 wooden tables faced the bench, one for the plaintiff, one for the defendant. Gregory sat at the defendant's table. 3 lawyers surrounded him, whispering among themselves. He looked relaxed, confident, even amused. When his eyes met mine, he smiled faintly, as if this were just another business meeting he intended to win. I walked to my table and set down my folder of notes. Douglas leaned toward me and whispered, "Stay focused. Facts are on your side." I nodded, though my hands were trembling again. Somewhere deep inside, I still hoped the truth would matter. He wore a navy blue pinstripe suit that looked tailored to perfection. The fabric caught the morning light with a faint sheen, like quiet power on display. His silver hair was styled immaculately. He looked like a man who owned the room, which was exactly how he wanted to look. When I entered, his eyes flicked toward me for a brief second. No warmth, no anger. Just that cold, practiced neutrality that always hid something sharper underneath. Then he turned to his lead attorney and whispered something. The 2 of them chuckled softly, like the whole thing was an inside joke. I sat beside Douglas at the plaintiff's table. My hands were trembling again, so I folded them in my lap, keeping them out of sight. Douglas leaned slightly toward me. "We stick to the plan," he whispered. "Stay calm. Present the evidence." "The facts are on our side," I nodded. My throat was dry. Words felt impossible. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door behind the bench opened. Judge Harrison Whitmore walked in. Everyone stood. He looked older than I remembered, late 60s, tall, with that air of authority that made you straighten your back even if you'd done nothing wrong. His gray hair was neatly combed, his expression serious. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and began reading from the docket. His voice was steady, practiced, and carried across the small courtroom without effort. "We are here for the case of Julia versus Gregory concerning ownership and management disputes of Summit Textile Company," he said. "I have reviewed the filings from both sides. We will begin with opening statements. Counsel for the plaintiff may proceed." Douglas stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the center of the courtroom. His tone was calm, deliberate, professional. He started by outlining the company's origins, how my mother had built Summit Textile from nothing, and how her will clearly defined shared ownership between father and daughter. He explained how Gregory had systematically excluded me from decisions, violated partnership agreements, and falsified loan documents. He laid out a simple timeline: opportunity, manipulation, forgery, and control. I watched Judge Whitmore's face the whole time. Nothing, no sign of reaction. He took notes with mechanical precision, occasionally glancing up but never showing where his thoughts landed. When Douglas finished, the judge nodded once. "Thank you. Counsel for the defense? Vincent, my father's attorney, rose with quiet confidence. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with the easy posture of a man who had spent decades winning arguments. He smiled respectfully at the judge, then turned toward the courtroom. Your Honor, he began, his tone smooth and sympathetic. This is a sad case. What we see here is not a matter of fraud, but of grief. A daughter struggling to accept that business decisions sometimes require hard choices. He gestured toward Gregory. My client has led Summit Textile with dedication. He has kept it profitable despite a changing market and rising costs. The plaintiff, while well-intentioned, lacks both the experience and temperament necessary for executive management. Her accusations of fraud are baseless. The loan in question was properly approved. Her claim of being excluded from decisions is inaccurate. One cannot be excluded from meetings one rarely attends. It was a lie. Every word of it. I had been there every single day. I had the emails, the minutes, the records. I had kept detailed logs of every ignored proposal, every canceled meeting, every unauthorized contract. Still, listening to Vincent speak, I could feel the story slipping away from me. He painted me as ungrateful, unstable, emotional. By the time he finished, I could see the faintest nod from the judge. Douglas's jaw tightened. He whispered, "We stay focused." Evidence, not emotion. The judge cleared his throat. Thank you, counsel. We will now hear testimony. Plaintiff's first witness. The morning dragged forward in slow motion. Douglas called our first witnesses. My mother's former assistant, the company's accountant, a senior supplier who had worked with her for 20 years. Each one spoke clearly and professionally. They described my involvement in the company, my mother's explicit wishes, and Gregory's sudden unilateral control after her death. They described the forged documents and suspicious transfers. Every statement was factual, documented, supported, but I saw it, the subtle cues from the bench. The way Judge Whitmore leaned forward when Gregory's attorneys objected, but barely looked up when Douglas did. The way he interrupted my witnesses with skeptical questions, but allowed my father's team to talk freely. None of it overt, just enough to tilt the ground beneath us. During a short recess, I followed Douglas into the hallway. He's not listening, I said quietly. He's already made up his mind. Douglas rubbed his temples. I know, but we keep going. We need the full record. If the judgment is biased, we appeal. An appeal will take years, I said. He'll strip the company bare by then. I know, he repeated, his voice heavy. But this is the process. We finish it, I nodded, though the words felt hollow. The afternoon was worse. Gregory took the stand. He looked composed, like a man accepting an award. When Douglas asked him about his role in the company's early days, he smiled softly. My wife and I built Summit together, he said, rewriting history with casual confidence. She had vision. I had business sense. We complemented each other. I clenched my hands under the table. My mother had been the one making supplier calls, managing payroll, handling contracts while he was out golfing or traveling. But there he was, rewriting the past in real time, and the judge was listening. He spoke about his grief after her death. How he had tried to guide me but found me resistant to structure. How my emotional state made collaboration impossible. His tone was calm, regretful, almost fatherly. I love my daughter, he said, turning toward the judge with measured sincerity. But love doesn't qualify someone to run a business. My only goal has been to protect what my late wife built. It was a performance, and it was perfect. Every word designed to sound reasonable, every pause rehearsed. I wanted to shout. To call him what he really was. But I sat still, nails pressing into my palms until I felt the sting. When it was time for cross-examination, Douglas stood. His tone stayed professional, but his questions cut directly. He asked about the forged signatures, about decisions made without joint consent, about the unauthorized transfer of company funds. Gregory didn't flinch. He had explanations ready for every accusation. A clerical mix-up. A misunderstanding. An urgent business decision. Always smooth, never defensive, the courtroom felt smaller by the minute. Every word, every look, every gesture from the judge seemed to favor the defense. I could feel it building, the slow, invisible tilt toward injustice, and as Gregory stepped down from the witness stand, I understood what this trial really was. It wasn't just about ownership. It was about power, and power in this room was not mine. My father's answers came smooth and rehearsed. The signatures were not forged, he said. I had simply forgotten signing the documents. The business decisions were urgent and could not wait for what he called lengthy consultations. The missing money? Properly allocated for development, he claimed. Judge Whitmore nodded thoughtfully, as if the explanations made perfect sense. He asked follow-up questions, not to challenge but to guide. Each question gave my father a path to polish his story further. By the end of the day, I could see it clearly. The evidence did not matter. The truth did not matter. The judgment, in all but formality, had already been written. The trial continued into a second day. Douglas came prepared with new material. He called a forensic document analyst, a seasoned expert who had worked with federal agencies for over 15 years. His credentials were beyond reproach. The expert projected enlarged images of the loan papers on the courtroom screen. With a calm, precise tone, he explained every inconsistency. The line pressure, he said, was uneven. The curve of the J in my signature was off by a fraction that only appeared in traced forgeries. The ink density varied in ways that proved two signatures came from different pens. He concluded that the documents were undeniably forged. It should have been a turning point. It should have been the moment the entire courtroom shifted. Instead, Judge Whitmore looked bored. He leaned back, flipping through his notes as if waiting for the testimony to end. When Douglas finished questioning, Vincent rose for cross-examination. He smiled, his tone measured and polite. "Mr. Caldwell," he began, "is it possible for a person's signature to vary under stress? Say, if someone is emotional, distracted, or unwell?" The expert nodded slightly. "Some variation can occur, yes. But the differences here are significant," Vincent pressed. "But variation is possible?" "Technically, yes," the expert replied carefully. Vincent smiled faintly and turned to the judge. "No further questions." Judge Whitmore nodded again, as if that single exchange had canceled all the expert's testimony. When the session adjourned for lunch, the air felt heavy with defeat. Douglas went to make phone calls. I walked a few blocks from the courthouse and found a small park. I sat on a bench under a dying tree, the heat of the pavement rising through my shoes. I thought of my mother. She had been fierce, disciplined, and endlessly kind. She worked 16-hour days without complaint. I had grown up beside her in that warehouse, learning how to check fabric quality, how to negotiate prices, how to treat suppliers with fairness. She built a company not only for herself, but for me. Her last words to me had been simple: "Never let anyone take what's yours." And here I was, watching everything she had built slip away. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Probably spam. Probably another message from a news outlet fishing for a quote. But something made me open it. "I heard about your trial. Your father is a fraud. I can prove it. Are you interested?" I froze. The words didn't look like a scam message. They were too specific. Too sharp. My first instinct was suspicion. Then curiosity. Then something else. Hope. I typed back quickly. "Who is this?" The reply came within seconds. "Someone who used to work with Gregory. Someone he screwed over just like he's screwing you. I have documentation, recordings, things that will change everything. Meet me tonight." My pulse quickened. It could have been a trap. It could have been anyone. But it also could have been real. I should have told Douglas. I should have forwarded him the message immediately. But desperation makes people reckless. And I was running out of ground. I agreed to meet. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop across town at 7 that evening. When Douglas returned from his calls, I told him I needed time alone to decompress before the next day. He looked at me closely. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow's the final session. We'll finish strong," I nodded. I lied. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans and disinfectant. A few customers sat scattered across the room, faces lit by their phone screens. In the back corner, a woman waved me over. She looked to be in her 40s, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and deep shadows under her eyes. Her face carried the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from a sleepless night, but from years of holding something heavy. "Julia," she said softly as I approached. "Thank you for coming. Who are you?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "My name is Helen," she said. "I used to work for your father. About 5 years ago, before your mother passed, I sat down across from her, studying her face." "You worked for him doing what?" "Accounting," she said. "I handled the books for a few of his side ventures. Projects your mother didn't know about." "What kind of projects?" She hesitated, glancing toward the window before continuing. "Real estate deals, offshore investments, some small import contracts that were questionable. He paid me to keep quiet. I didn't ask too many questions. I just managed the numbers." My stomach tightened. "And then?" "When your mother got sick, he stopped paying," she said. "Told me he needed to consolidate finances. I pressed him for the money he owed. He told me if I caused problems, he'd make sure I never worked in accounting again. Said he had friends who could make life very difficult." Her tone was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly as she spoke. "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell me this after all this time?" Helen reached into her bag and pulled out a worn manila folder. She slid it across the table. "Because I kept everything," she said quietly. "Copies of every record, every transaction, emails, even some recordings. Conversations where he bragged about moving assets without your mother's knowledge, about creating fake accounts in other names, about hiding funds before she could find out." I stared at the folder but didn't touch it yet. "You're saying he hid assets from my mother?" Helen nodded. "Millions. He used your company's accounts as a shell. Some of that money might still be in circulation under different entities. If you can prove that, it changes your case entirely." I finally opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, copies of wire transfers, scanned contracts, and a few printed email threads. Gregory's name appeared again and again, attached to companies I'd never heard of. I felt a mix of nausea and relief. For the first time in months, the truth wasn't just something I believed in. It was something I could touch. Helen leaned closer. "He thinks everyone he's burned is too scared to talk. But I'm done being scared." I looked up at her. "Will you testify?" "If you protect me," she said. "If your lawyer guarantees safety and anonymity until I'm called, yes." I closed the folder, clutching it tightly. "You'll have it. I promise." For the first time since the trial began, I felt the balance shift, just slightly, but enough. Enough to believe the fight wasn't over yet. "I kept those files as insurance," Helen said quietly, "in case he ever came after me." Her voice was calm, but her hands betrayed a faint tremor as she pushed the folder toward me. "When I heard about your trial, I realized what I had could finally help someone." I opened the folder with unsteady fingers. Inside were pages of numbers, emails, property records, and printed transcripts. I scanned the first sheet, bank statements from accounts I had never seen before. Each one listed my father as the account holder. Balances in the hundreds of thousands. Transfers between shell companies with vague names like Sunset Capital Holdings and Redstone Partners. Another document listed property purchases in Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. None of them had any connection to textiles. Then I saw a printout of a recorded conversation. The words hit like a punch. "People trust too easily," my father's voice said. "They want to believe you're on their side. That's the trick. If they think you're their friend, they'll hand you everything." The line ended with a laugh, a sound I had heard all my life. I looked up from the papers. "Why now? Why tell me this after all this time?" Helen's expression hardened. "Because I was scared. I still am. Your father isn't just corrupt. He's connected. He has people who owe him favors. When I worked for him, I saw things I shouldn't have. When your mother got sick, he got bolder. He thought she was too distracted to notice what he was doing." My throat felt tight. "What exactly did he do to her?" She leaned forward, her eyes sharp with anger. "He bled her dry. Every year he siphoned money from the company to his private ventures. When profits dipped, he covered the gap with creative accounting. Your mother trusted him completely. She never checked the secondary ledgers. She believed the numbers he gave her. Helen paused, taking a deep breath. When she got sick, he played the grieving husband. He brought her flowers, handled her medicine, sat by her bed, and kept moving money out of her company. He's a parasite, Julia. He drained your mother until there was nothing left. And now he's doing the same thing to you. The air in the cafe felt colder. I swallowed hard. Can I use this in court? She hesitated. Some of it. The bank records are real, so they'll hold up. The recordings depend on state consent laws. The judge might not allow them as evidence, but they still show a pattern of deceit. If your lawyer knows what he's doing, this could shift the balance. I thought about Judge Whitmore. His dismissive glances. The way he cut off our witnesses but let my father's team talk for as long as they wanted. The judge is biased, I said quietly. He's my father's friend. I don't know if any of this will matter. Helen studied me for a long moment, then leaned closer. Then make it matter. Find the pressure point. Every corrupt man has one. Find what the judge values most and protect it, or threaten it. Power only listens when something it cares about is at risk. Her words hung in the air between us. I looked back down at the folder. My hands had stopped shaking. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel trapped. I felt focused. Thank you, I said quietly. Helen stood, slipping her bag over her shoulder. Destroy him, Julia. For your mother. For every person he's used. Then she walked out, leaving the faint smell of coffee and cigarette smoke behind her. I stayed for another hour, reading through every document. The numbers, the transactions, the names of the companies. I memorized as much as I could. Each page peeled back another layer of the man I thought I knew. When I finally closed the folder, I knew what I had to do. At home, I made coffee and opened my laptop. It was almost midnight. I started typing into search bars, pulling public records, reading old news articles. I searched for Judge Harrison Whitmore. The glow from the screen was the only light in the room. I scrolled through decades of information, photos of ribbon cuttings, interviews about his dedication to justice, quotes about integrity and ethics. A respected judge, a man with a spotless record. He had a wife, 2 adult children, and 4 grandchildren. He sat on the boards of several civic groups and charities. On paper, he was everything a judge should be: fair, respected, untouchable. But I had learned from my father that nobody is untouchable. At around 2 a.m, I started checking property records. It was a long shot, but real estate always leaves a trail. I found his main residence in Phoenix, modest for a man of his position. Then a second listing, a vacation property in Sedona, purchased 8 years earlier. The price was $400,000, which seemed average for that area. Still, something about it felt off. I checked the seller's information. It wasn't a person, it was a limited liability company. I traced the LLC through state filings, one layer at a time. Each company led to another company, each registered under a different name in a different city. At 3:30, I poured another cup of coffee and kept going. By 4 a.m, I found it. The LLC that sold the Sedona property to Judge Whitmore was owned by a holding company based in Nevada. And that holding company listed one of its minority stakeholders as Gregory Sloan. My father. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My father had been involved in selling a house to the judge presiding over my case. The connection wasn't huge. On paper, it looked like nothing. A small ownership stake, probably less than 10%. But it was enough. Enough to raise a question. Enough to show influence. I checked the dates again. The sale had gone through in May. 2 months later, a case involving one of my father's business partners appeared in Whitmore's court. The ruling had gone in their favor. It wasn't proof of bribery. Not yet, but it was a pattern. And patterns were what Douglas could build on. Still, I needed more. Something that would make the connection undeniable. I scrolled through archived articles, charity records, board memberships. Whitmore had a spotless public image, but even spotless records can have cracks if you look long enough. By 5 a.m., the first light of dawn crept through the window blinds. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but I knew one thing. If my father and his friend thought this trial was already decided, they were about to learn that I had no intention of losing quietly. I opened the folder Helen had given me again, this time with a specific goal. I needed something that directly tied my father to Judge Whitmore. Any sign of money, property, or favors exchanged. The pages blurred together after hours of reading, line after line of numbers and notes. Then, on page 47, I found it, a payment. $75,000. Labeled as a consulting fee to a company named Whitmore Advisory Services. The entry was buried among dozens of others, dated 3 years earlier. The memo line read, "Legal consultation. Nothing else." My heart started pounding. I opened my laptop and typed the company name into a search bar. It took several tries before anything useful appeared. When the business registration finally loaded, I froze. The listed owner was Harrison Whitmore, Jr., the judge's son. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. My father had paid $75,000 to the son of the man currently presiding over his case. The same judge who had dismissed every argument we made and ruled in my father's favor at every turn. The same man who barely pretended to listen to the expert witness who had proven forgery. I needed to be sure it was the same person. I searched for Harrison Whitmore, Jr. on LinkedIn. The profile appeared within seconds. A smiling headshot. Location, Phoenix, Arizona. Occupation, business consultant. The description was a string of meaningless buzzwords: strategic development, synergy optimization, cross-sector growth. But the education and location matched perfectly. This was him. I took screenshots of everything. The property sale, the $75,000 payment, the judge's son's consulting company. Then I created a timeline that connected them. The property deal between my father and the judge. The payment to the son's company. The favorable rulings that followed in cases linked to my father's associates. Individually, each piece could be dismissed. Together, they formed a pattern that screamed corruption. It was almost dawn by the time I finished organizing everything. My eyes ached, but I didn't stop until I had triple-checked every date and number. I knew what this meant. If Douglas presented this the right way, we could shatter the case against me, and maybe expose something much bigger. At 8 a.m., I met Douglas outside the courthouse. He looked tired but focused, his suit slightly rumpled from too many late nights. I pulled him aside. "I have something," I said quietly. "Something big," he frowned. "What kind of something?" I handed him the folder. "Just look." Douglas flipped through the pages quickly at first, then slower as the implications sank in. His expression shifted from curiosity to alarm, then to grim understanding. When he looked up, his voice was low. "Where did you get this?" "A former employee of my father's," I said. "She worked as an accountant. She kept records, emails, transactions, recordings. I spent all night verifying them." Douglas let out a slow breath and rubbed his temple. "Julia, this is explosive. If this holds up, it could end the trial. The judge would have to step down, maybe even face investigation. But we need to be absolutely sure. If we accuse a sitting judge of corruption without proof beyond question, it could destroy our case. It could destroy you. I'm sure," I said firmly. "The property sale is in public records. The payment to his son's company is in my father's ledgers. The dates line up. It's real." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Then we use it. But not recklessly. We can't just walk in and accuse the judge outright. He'd shut us down before we finished a sentence. We have to make him confront it himself." "How?" I asked. Douglas's voice dropped to a near whisper. "During closing arguments, I'll allude to irregularities in how this case has been handled. I'll mention potential conflicts of interest without naming anyone. Then, when the judge tries to dismiss it, You'll ask permission to address the court directly. Stay calm, present the evidence clearly. Don't accuse. Just show the facts and let him connect the dots. My stomach tightened. And if he still rules against us? Douglas gave a thin smile. Then we file an appeal for judicial misconduct. This won't stay quiet for long. Once the press gets hold of it, the entire bench will be under scrutiny. Judges hate that kind of spotlight. We walked into the courthouse together. The echo of our footsteps felt heavier than usual. My father was already seated at the defense table, his posture relaxed, his suit immaculate. When he saw me, he smiled. A small, self-satisfied smile. He thought it was over. Judge Whitmore entered at precisely 9 o'clock. Court is now in session, he said. We will proceed with closing arguments. Counsel for the defense, you may begin. Vincent rose smoothly, every gesture practiced. His voice was calm, confident. Your Honor, he began. This case is, at its heart, a misunderstanding. A family dispute magnified by grief and miscommunication. My client, Mr. Gregory Sloan, is a man of integrity, a man who devoted his life to building a business, a legacy, alongside his late wife. The plaintiff, while understandably emotional, has allowed resentment to cloud her judgment. His tone made me want to scream. He spoke of me like a naive child, ungrateful and impulsive. He painted my father as a saint, a misunderstood patriarch trying to protect his daughter from her own incompetence. Every word was a lie. I kept my face still. My hands folded neatly on the table. I didn't blink. When Vincent finished, Judge Whitmore nodded approvingly. Thank you, counsel. Then he turned to Douglas. Plaintiff's counsel, your closing argument. Douglas stood. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. When he spoke, every word was deliberate. Your Honor, this case is about honoring the vision of a woman who built something from nothing. Helen Summit worked her entire life to create a business that provided for her family and her employees. She wanted her legacy protected, not exploited. The evidence shows that intent clearly. He paused, letting his words sink in. But along the way, something went wrong. The company she built was drained of its purpose. Decisions were made not in service of her vision, but for private gain. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but his fingers tapped once against the bench. Douglas continued. And in the course of this trial, we've seen troubling irregularities. Evidence ignored. Testimonies dismissed. Actions taken that raise serious concerns about impartiality in these proceedings. The air in the courtroom shifted. Vincent stood slightly, ready to object, but Whitmore raised a hand. Continue, the judge said, his tone cool. Douglas inclined his head. I will, Your Honor. But before I do, my client has requested permission to make a brief statement to the court. Whitmore frowned. Ms. Summit, you understand that closing arguments are not for new testimony? Yes, Your Honor, I said, standing slowly. I'm not offering new testimony. I'm providing clarification, supported by documentation already in evidence. He hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. I took a deep breath, opened the folder, and laid the first page on the table where everyone could see. Your Honor, during our review of financial documents, we discovered a payment from Gregory Sloan Enterprises to a consulting firm named Whitmore Advisory Services, totaling $75,000. The payment was recorded 3 years ago. I saw the judge's expression tighten almost imperceptibly. The registered owner of that company, I continued, is Mr. Harrison Whitmore, Jr. The room went silent. Douglas didn't move. Vincent opened his mouth, then closed it again. I kept my voice steady. In addition, records show property transactions between Mr. Sloan and a holding company connected to Your Honor's family. I'm not suggesting wrongdoing. I'm simply noting these financial ties because they raise concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Judge Whitmore's hand froze mid-motion. For the first time, he didn't meet my eyes. I folded the papers back into the folder. That's all, Your Honor. Then I sat down. The silence stretched for several seconds before the judge finally spoke. His voice was strained. Court will recess for 15 minutes. He stood quickly and left through the side door. Douglas leaned close, whispering, That landed. Whatever happens next, he knows he's cornered. I didn't answer. My pulse was still hammering, but for the first time since the trial began, I felt something close to hope. Douglas stepped toward the center of the courtroom. His voice was steady. Your Honor, the will in question is unambiguous. Helen Summit divided ownership of Summit Textile equally between her husband and her daughter. That was her choice, her right, and her legacy. The defendant has violated that legacy at every turn. He clasped his hands behind his back and spoke with deliberate calm. Mr. Sloan has systematically excluded the plaintiff from decision-making despite her equal ownership. He has diverted funds, damaged long-term supplier relationships, and signed contracts that compromise the company's stability. Most alarming, he secured a loan using documents bearing a forged signature, his daughter's, without her knowledge or consent. Judge Whitmore shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing. Counsel, we have heard conflicting testimony regarding those signatures. Douglas didn't waver. Yes, Your Honor, but we also heard from a certified forensic document examiner with 15 years of federal experience who verified the forgery. The expert's analysis was detailed and conclusive. The defendant's denials have been inconsistent and unsupported. The evidence stands on its own. I studied the judge's face. He wasn't moved. He wasn't undecided either. He had chosen a side, and it wasn't ours. Douglas took a breath and continued. Your Honor, this case is about protecting lawful property rights and the expressed will of a woman whose intentions are beyond dispute. Julia Sloan isn't asking for sympathy. She isn't seeking special consideration. She is asking this court to enforce what her mother wrote and signed, her rightful share of the company she helped maintain. He paused. That is all she seeks. Justice that aligns with both the law and basic fairness. Then he changed his tone, quiet but sharper. However, I must address something unusual about this trial. Throughout these proceedings, we have witnessed irregularities, patterns that concern us. The room tensed. Douglas continued, voice even. Our witnesses have been questioned aggressively, often interrupted mid-response. The defense witnesses, by contrast, have spoken freely. Expert testimony rooted in science has been disregarded, while anecdotal claims have been accepted without verification. These inconsistencies suggest a deviation from the impartial standard this court is meant to uphold. Judge Whitmore's jaw tightened. His tone dropped. Counsel, are you questioning the impartiality of this court? Douglas kept his gaze steady. Your Honor, I'm noting a pattern that raises legitimate concern about bias. We have an obligation to the record to do so. The air in the courtroom thickened. My father, who had been leaning back in his chair with smug composure, sat forward. Vincent's pen stopped moving. Everyone waited. The judge's voice was cold. That is a serious accusation. Do you have any basis for such a claim beyond dissatisfaction with my rulings? Douglas turned slightly, meeting my eyes. I nodded once. He faced the bench again. Your Honor, we have recently obtained information suggesting a conflict of interest. Evidence of a pre-existing relationship between you and the defendant that extends beyond casual social contact. The judge snapped. I have already addressed this. Mr. Sloan and I are social acquaintances. That does not constitute a conflict. Douglas's tone didn't change. The relationship appears more substantial, Your Honor. We have documentation showing financial transactions between entities owned by Mr. Sloan and business interests linked to your family. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop. The gallery went still. My father's confident posture collapsed. His jaw tightened as Vincent leaned in to whisper something urgent. The judge's face flushed crimson. Counsel, what exactly are you implying? Douglas stood firm. We are not implying anything. We are stating facts. Out of respect for the integrity of this court, we believe these matters warrant examination. Transparency protects the credibility of the judiciary, and this court deserves that protection. Whitmore's voice shook. You are making vague accusations without offering evidence. I could hold you in contempt, Douglas remained calm. We have evidence, Your Honor. We chose not to submit it immediately to avoid public embarrassment or misunderstanding. But if the court wishes, we are prepared to enter it into the record now. A murmur spread through the gallery. Whitmore's gavel struck once, hard. Order. There will be order in this court. Douglas didn't flinch. Your Honor, We have a record of a $75,000 payment from Gregory Sloan Enterprises to a consulting firm named Whitmore Advisory Services. The firm is registered to your son, Mr. Harrison Whitmore, Jr. The sound in the room vanished. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. Douglas continued. The transaction occurred 3 years ago, labeled as legal consultation. There is no evidence that any consulting services were performed. The payment coincides with a series of favorable rulings issued by this court for Mr. Sloan's business associates. The judge's hand trembled on the bench. This is absurd. I know nothing of my son's business activities, Douglas nodded. That may well be true, Your Honor, but the appearance of impropriety exists regardless of intent. Additionally, public property records indicate a sale of a Sedona property from a company partially owned by the defendant to your family's trust. That transaction predates this case by several years, but again, the appearance of conflict is undeniable. Vincent shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt to smear both my client and the court itself. There is no admissible evidence, only speculation. Whitmore cut him off. Sit down, counsel. His voice cracked slightly. Douglas stepped back. We raise these matters not to insult the court, but to protect its integrity. If this information is inaccurate, it can be disproven easily. But if it is not, it must be addressed. The judge's hand gripped the edge of the bench. His face had turned pale beneath the flush. This is highly improper, Douglas spoke softly. Impropriety is precisely what we seek to prevent, Your Honor. Silence hung heavy. I watched Whitmore's eyes dart from Douglas to me, then to my father. My father sat frozen, his usual smooth confidence replaced with something close to fear. Vincent leaned close to him again, whispering urgently, but Gregory didn't react. Finally, the judge spoke. We will recess. 15 minutes. He stood abruptly, his robe brushing the table as he exited through the side door without looking at anyone. As soon as he was gone, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled notes. One of the clerks looked shaken. Douglas turned to me. His voice was low. That was the right move. He's rattled. Whatever happens now, he can't pretend neutrality. He knows we can expose him. My hands were steady for the first time in days. Do you think he'll step down? Douglas exhaled slowly. He might not have a choice. The question is whether he tries to control the damage or take you down with him. Across the aisle, my father turned to look at me. His expression was unreadable, part anger, part disbelief. For the first time, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. Douglas placed a hand on my arm. Stay calm. When we return, he'll either recuse himself or make a ruling that exposes his bias completely. Either way, we win something today. I nodded, though my pulse was still hammering. As the bailiff called for recess, I looked at the empty judge's chair. For months, I had felt powerless in that room. But not anymore. The truth had finally found its way into the light. Judge Whitmore stared at Douglas for a long, silent moment. I could see the thoughts running behind his eyes. He was calculating, trying to gauge how much we actually had, how far we were willing to go, and what the fallout would be if the story went public. His voice came out low and tight. Approach the bench. Douglas and Vincent rose and walked forward. They leaned in close. The conversation was hushed, impossible to hear. Vincent's face shifted from irritation to disbelief, then to anger. The judge's jaw clenched. His hands moved in small, controlled gestures, the gestures of a man trying to keep his temper in check. After several minutes, both lawyers stepped back. The judge looked at the court reporter. We are off the record. The keys stopped clicking. The silence that followed carried weight. Whitmore's gaze turned to me. Miss Sloan, your counsel has made serious claims. Before I decide on their relevance, I want to hear from you directly. My throat was dry, but I forced myself to stand. Yes, Your Honor. Do you believe you have evidence of impropriety involving this court? My legs trembled, but my voice stayed firm. Yes, Your Honor. I do. He leaned back slightly. Describe the nature of this evidence. I looked across the courtroom. My father's eyes met mine. For the first time, there was no smugness there. No contempt, only fear. I have financial records showing a payment of $75,000 from my father to a company called Whitmore Advisory Services. That company is owned by your son. The payment was made 3 years ago. A murmur spread through the room. I kept speaking. I also have property records showing that you purchased a vacation home through an LLC, partially owned by my father. The sale price appears significantly below market value, and I have a timeline of both transactions that aligns with multiple favorable rulings your courtroom issued for my father's business associates. Silence followed. Thick, absolute silence. The judge's face had drained of color. These are serious allegations. They are not allegations, Your Honor. They are documented facts. I have public records, screenshots, and financial statements to support them. I did not want to bring this forward. I wanted this trial to stand on merit. But I can't allow my mother's legacy to be destroyed under the weight of corruption. Vincent sprang to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. A desperate move by the plaintiff to disrupt these proceedings. These are unrelated business transactions that— Sit down, counsel, Whitmore said quietly. The words hit like a hammer. Vincent froze and lowered himself into his chair. The judge looked at me again, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to my father. My father didn't meet his eyes. Whitmore stared at him for a long time before glancing down at his hands. We are in recess, he said finally. Court will reconvene in 1 hour. He stood, his robe rippling as he left the bench. No one spoke. The bailiff announced the recess, but his voice sounded distant. Douglas touched my shoulder. Come on. We walked down the hallway into a small conference room. The door closed behind us, cutting off the echo of the courtroom. Douglas set his briefcase on the table and opened his notes, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. You did well, he said quietly. That took courage. I stared at the wall. I just told the truth. Truth isn't always safe, he said, especially when it threatens people in power. The words lingered. I thought of my father sitting there, realizing the walls were closing in. The empire he had built on intimidation and deceit was cracking. I wondered if he felt regret or only rage at being cornered. Probably rage. Men like him never saw themselves as wrong, only unlucky when caught. My phone buzzed. A new text from the unknown number. Helen, I heard what happened. Well done, but be careful. Your father will be desperate now. Desperate people are dangerous. The name, Helen. I stared at it. This person always used that name when contacting me. Always watching. Always precise, I typed back. Thank you for the warning. There's something else you should know. The consulting company, Whitmore Advisory Services, it's a shell, isn't it? The reply came almost instantly. Yes, it doesn't perform any legitimate work. It exists solely to receive payments that appear legal but are bribes. I helped set it up. Your father has been paying the judge's family for years. My grip tightened on the phone. Years. Not one payment. Not one favor. A system, I typed back. How many payments? At least 8 that I know of. Over $400,000 total. All disguised as consulting fees or business expenses. 400,000. That wasn't influence. That was a financial partnership. A machine built on secrecy. I handed the phone to Douglas. He read the thread twice, his brow furrowing. Who sent this? I don't know. The number's always different. They know everything. Every step, he looked up. This confirms it. If that's true, we're not dealing with simple misconduct. We're dealing with long-term bribery. We'll need to get this to the state attorney's office before he can suppress it. What happens now? I asked. That depends on Whitmore, he said. If he recuses himself, the case resets under a new judge. If he doesn't, we go to the press. Either way, your father's protection is gone. I looked down at the table. He'll fight back. Yes, Douglas said. But now, everything he does will look like panic. He's lost control of the narrative, I nodded slowly. He's dangerous when he's cornered. Douglas looked at me. So is the truth. The hour crawled by. I could hear voices in the hall, reporters, clerks, even a few lawyers whispering near the courtroom doors. The news was already spreading. Judges didn't recess trials mid-closing unless something catastrophic had happened. When the bailiff finally knocked and told us to return, Douglas closed his notes. "Stay calm," he said. "Whatever happens, don't speak unless addressed." He might lash out. He might resign. But either way, it's over for him. We walked back into the courtroom. My father was there, his tie loosened, his face pale. Vincent whispered to him, but he barely reacted. The judge's seat was still empty. For a long minute, everyone waited. Then finally, the side door opened. Judge Whitmore walked in slowly, his face drawn. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and stared at the bench in front of him without speaking. The gavel came down once. "Court is in session," he said. Voice quiet, almost drained. Douglas leaned slightly toward me. "He's already decided something," he whispered. I didn't respond. My focus was on the judge's hands. They were trembling. Whatever came next would change everything. Douglas's face was grave. "If this is real, we are looking at criminal activity. The judge could lose his seat, maybe face prison. Your father, too." I swallowed hard. "Is it enough?" "It's more than enough," he said. "But Julia, once we take this step, there's no going back. This leaves civil court. It becomes criminal. Federal investigators will come in. Your father will be indicted. The judge's career will end. The business will be frozen while the investigation unfolds. Are you ready for that?" I thought about my mother. Her pale hands against the white hospital sheets. Her voice faint but steady as she told me to be strong. She had built a company with honesty and grit, only for it to be gutted by the man who claimed to love her. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." When we returned to the courtroom, the air was different. The tension was heavier, quieter. My father sat at the defense table, smaller than I'd ever seen him. His usual smirk was gone. Vincent leaned in close, whispering fast, but my father didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the bench, his jaw set tight. The side door opened. Judge Whitmore entered. His face looked ashen, his posture stiff. He sat, shuffled some papers, and cleared his throat. "After reviewing the situation," he began, his voice slow and tired, "I have determined that there are sufficient concerns regarding potential conflicts of interest to warrant further examination." He paused, looking down at his desk. "In the interest of judicial integrity, I am declaring a mistrial. This case will be reassigned to another judge. Proceedings will begin anew." Vincent shot up from his chair. "Your Honor, that is unnecessary. The plaintiff has presented no valid proof of impropriety." "These insinuations—" "The decision is made, counsel," Whitmore interrupted. His tone had no strength left, only exhaustion. "This trial is over. All parties will receive notice of reassignment within 48 hours. He stood. Then, unexpectedly, he looked directly at me. His voice softened. "Miss Julia, for the record, I have always strived to conduct myself with integrity. Any suggestion otherwise is deeply offensive." I met his gaze. "Your Honor, I have documentation of 8 separate payments totaling over $400,000 from my father to your son's consulting company. If you have acted with integrity, I'm sure the investigation will prove it." The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, then closed again. He turned, stepped down from the bench, and left the room without another word. My father rose slowly. His lawyers surrounded him, whispering, but he brushed them off. His eyes locked on mine across the courtroom. For the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked venomous. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. "I know exactly what I've done," I said. "I stopped you from stealing my mother's legacy." He held my gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked out. His footsteps echoed until the door closed behind him. I didn't feel victory, just a deep, cold stillness. Douglas put a hand on my shoulder. "It's not over," he said. "The new trial will happen, but at least it will be clean. What about the payments?" I asked. "What happens now?" "I'll file a complaint with the Judicial Conduct Board," he said. "And I'll send the evidence to the Attorney General's office. If your source is solid, the investigation will move fast. There'll be criminal charges," I nodded. "The source is solid." He looked at me carefully. "Then brace yourself. The fallout will be ugly." We walked out of the courthouse together. The sun was setting behind the city, the sky streaked orange and red. Reporters were already gathering at the steps, but Douglas guided me past them without a word. When we reached the bottom, I stopped. The cool air hit my face. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. My phone rang. "Unknown number," I answered. "Hello?" My father's voice came through tight and controlled. "We need to talk." "There's nothing left to say," I said. "You don't understand what you've done," he hissed. "That judge was our best chance at a resolution. Now this will drag out for years. The legal fees will crush the business." "The business?" I said. "You mean my mother's company, the one you gutted to feed your greed." His tone hardened. "You think you've won something here? You've destroyed everything she built." "No," I said. "You did that the moment you started lying to her." There was a pause. I could hear his breathing through the line, shallow and angry. "You always thought you were smarter than everyone else," he said finally. "You think you understand how the world works. You don't. People like me survive because we make hard choices. You'll see that soon enough." "Goodbye, Dad." I hung up before he could answer. The silence that followed felt heavy, but it wasn't hopeless. It was the sound of something ending. Douglas checked his watch. "You should go home, Julia, get some rest. Tomorrow we start building the new case. With the evidence we have now, your father's position is collapsing." I nodded. "And the judge?" "He'll try to contain it," Douglas said. "But with the documents and the payments, he's finished. The oversight board will open an inquiry. The FBI might step in once financial crimes are on the table." We stood on the steps a moment longer. The courthouse behind us looked cold and gray in the fading light. For years it had been my father's shield, his symbol of control. Now it was just another building that would soon bear his name in headlines for all the wrong reasons. Douglas walked to his car. "One last thing," he said before getting in. "You did what most people can't. You broke the cycle." I watched him drive away. My phone buzzed again. A text. Same unknown number. "Helen." He called me. "He's panicking. You hit him harder than you know. Be careful. He won't go quietly," I typed back. "Thank you." "For everything." Her reply came seconds later. "You just lit a fire, Julia. Don't stop now. Make sure it burns all the way through." I looked up at the courthouse one last time. The windows reflected the dying light, and for the first time since this fight began, I felt a sense of control return. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, quiet and steady. "Be strong." I walked down the courthouse steps and into the night, ready for whatever came next. His voice came through the line, cold and deliberate. "Is that what you want? To see everything your mother built torn apart by lawyers?" "You made that choice," I said. My tone was flat. "You could have honored her will. You could have worked with me. You chose greed. You chose corruption. This is on you." "I'm giving you one chance to fix this," he said. "Drop the complaint against Whitmore. We'll settle this privately. You get 30% ownership and a board seat. Final offer." "I want what my mother left me," I said. "Half-equal partnership. Or we do this in court with a judge you didn't buy." Silence. Then, "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "I'm correcting one." I ended the call. Douglas was watching me from across the table. "You all right?" "I'm better than all right," I said. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm doing right by her. Not by staying quiet, not by taking whatever scraps he threw me. By fighting, he smiled faintly. She'd be proud. We walked to our cars. The evening heat of Phoenix wrapped around us. For the first time in months, I didn't feel crushed by it. I felt alive. As I drove home, the city lights blurred past my windshield. The case wasn't over, but I had cracked his armor. The corruption was out in the open. The silence that had protected him was gone. 3 days later, the story broke. A local investigative journalist published an article exposing the payments between my father and Judge Whitmore's son. The headline read, "Prominent Phoenix judge under investigation for bribery allegations." The article detailed every transaction, every property deal, every suspicious ruling. My case was mentioned by name as the spark that started the investigation. Within hours, state outlets picked it up. By nightfall, it was on national news. My phone exploded with calls. Reporters wanted statements. Old business partners of my mother reached out with messages of support. Some of her former employees sent messages thanking me for speaking up. A few lawyers offered to represent me for free in future filings. Douglas called that evening. His tone was calm, but there was energy in it. "The Attorney General's office just opened a formal investigation," he said. "They want to interview you about the evidence you turned over. They also want to talk to your source." "I'll reach out to her," I said. "This is good," he continued. "The coverage means they can't bury it. But it also means your father will push back harder. He's staring at potential charges. People in that position get reckless." "I can handle him," I said. "I know you can," Douglas replied. "Just be careful." That night I called Helen. She answered immediately. "I saw the news," she said. "Impressive work. The Attorney General wants to speak with you. Will you cooperate?" There was a pause, then a slow exhale. "Yes, it's time. I've been running from this for too long. If I'm going to turn on your father, I may as well do it completely." "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Your father won't take this lying down. He's spent decades building favors, hiding money. He'll fight this with everything he has." "Let him," I said. "I have the truth," she gave a bitter laugh. "Truth isn't always enough, but I hope it is this time." 3 weeks later, the case was reassigned. The new judge, Patricia Holbrook, was in her mid-50s. She had a reputation for precision and a zero-tolerance policy for manipulation. Every lawyer in Phoenix knew she was incorruptible. The first hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In that time, my father went on the offensive. His lawyers filed motion after motion, attacking my credibility. They claimed I fabricated evidence, that Douglas acted unethically, that the mistrial was based on false accusations. They wanted sanctions, penalties, and dismissals. Every motion was denied. The turning point came a week later. Vincent, his lead attorney, withdrew from the case. 2 other partners followed. Representing a client under criminal investigation for bribing a judge wasn't good for business. My father had to hire a smaller, less experienced firm. For a man obsessed with power and control, it was public humiliation. Meanwhile, the state investigation moved fast. Helen gave a full statement, complete with timelines, email copies, and bank records. The investigators subpoenaed financial documents and property transfers linked to my father's companies. Whitmore's son was questioned and broke under pressure. He admitted that his consulting company was a front, created to funnel consulting fees that were actually bribes. 2 weeks after the mistrial, Judge Whitmore resigned. His official statement claimed health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. News outlets ran photos of him leaving the courthouse, pale and silent, refusing to answer questions. Commentators debated how deep the corruption ran and whether other cases would be reviewed. Douglas forwarded me an article from the Arizona Tribune. The headline read, "Judicial Scandal Expands as State Investigators Probe Financial Ties Between Developers and Court Officials." Below the headline was a quote from an unnamed source in the Attorney General's office. "We have reason to believe the payments were part of a pattern that extended beyond one courtroom." I stared at that line for a long time. The system my father had manipulated for years was starting to collapse under its own weight. When Douglas called that night, I could hear the cautious optimism in his voice. "This is the turning point," he said. "If Whitmore's son cooperates, the rest will unravel fast. Your father's financials are under review. He can't hide everything." "He'll try," I said. "Of course. But the longer he fights, the deeper he sinks." I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The skyline shimmered against the dark desert sky. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel powerless. My father's empire was cracking. Not because I'd shouted the loudest, but because I'd refused to back down. The next morning, Helen texted me again. "Helen." They came to my house. Took my files, my laptop. I told them everything. "It's over for him," I typed back. You did the right thing. Her reply came a minute later. You think he'll give up? He won't. He'll try something desperate. Be ready. I set the phone down and stared at it. She was right. He wasn't done. But neither was I. The official statement said Judge Whitmore resigned for health reasons and wanted to spend more time with family. No one believed that. 3 days later, he was indicted. Bribery, corruption, wire fraud. The list went on. My father's name appeared next to his as a co-conspirator. The fallout was immediate. In Phoenix's business circles, the news hit like an earthquake. My father had been everywhere for decades. Fundraisers, trade shows, charity dinners. People had admired his charm and connections. Now, those same people were cutting ties to save themselves. His former partners released statements condemning unethical practices. Suppliers demanded payment up front. Clients canceled contracts. Summit Textile, once respected, was bleeding cash and credibility. The company my mother built was collapsing under his corruption. I refused to watch it die. That night, I called an emergency meeting. Only 8 employees were left, people who had stayed loyal through the chaos. Most had worked with my mother from the beginning. They sat around the conference table, exhausted and wary, waiting for me to explain how we could possibly survive. I stood at the head of the table. I know the last few weeks have been brutal. We've lost clients. The press has been relentless. But this company matters. My mother built it on hard work, fairness, and quality. I won't let it vanish because of my father's greed. Patricia, my mother's oldest employee, spoke up. What's your plan, Julia? Right now it looks like we're sinking. My plan is to remove my father entirely. Once the new trial confirms my ownership rights, he'll be out for good. Then we rebuild. We reach out to every client who left, tell them the truth, and prove we're still the company they trusted. We'll offer fair prices and the same level of service my mother demanded. A younger employee, Kevin, raised his hand. What about the legal costs? The investigation alone could bankrupt us. I've been talking to investors, I said. They see value here. We're damaged, but not broken. I'm negotiating terms that bring in capital without losing control. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, the room felt lighter. For the first time in months, I saw resolve instead of despair. Afterward, Patricia stopped me at the door. Your mother would be proud, she said. She used to tell me you had steel in your spine. I didn't see it until now. I learned from her, I said. She understood people. Your father never did. He saw money. She saw relationships. You're like her, Julia. In every way that counts. Her words hit hard. I blinked back the tears. Thank you, Patricia. That means more than you know. 3 weeks later, the second trial began. It was a Tuesday morning in late September. The courtroom was full. Reporters, business figures, onlookers. The scandal had made this case headline news. Judge Patricia Holbrook entered promptly. Her presence silenced the room. This court will follow procedure, she said. There will be no theatrics. Present your facts and let the law decide, Douglas began. His opening was precise. He laid out the will, the equal ownership, the exclusion from decision-making, and the forged loan documents. Then he went further, introducing records of side businesses and hidden assets. He described a man who had deceived his wife and continued that deception in court. My father's new lawyer, Robert, tried to counter, but he had little to work with. The bribery scandal had destroyed my father's reputation. Each time Robert tried to portray him as an honest businessman, Douglas calmly reminded the court of the criminal charges pending against him. On the third day, I took the stand. Douglas questioned me gently. Can you describe your relationship with your mother? She was everything I wanted to be, I said. She taught me the business, not just how to make money, but how to do it with integrity. She believed in fairness, in honoring her word. She built something real. And after her passing, how did your father treat you in business matters? Like an obstacle, I said. He ignored my ownership rights. He made every decision alone. He forged my signature to secure loans. He treated the company like his personal empire. Robert rose for cross-examination. His tone was sharp. He called me bitter, ungrateful, spoiled. He said I was angry because my father hadn't trusted me to run things. I stayed calm. Every time he tried to twist my words, I corrected him with documents, emails, meeting notes, witness statements. The facts were airtight. His frustration grew with each exchange. When I stepped down, Douglas called Helen. She entered quietly, dressed in gray, her hands clasped together. But her voice was steady. She described the secret accounts, the shell companies, the forged records. She told the court how my father had built a network of fraudulent businesses to hide money from both the IRS and his family. Douglas showed the paper trail, payment ledgers, bank statements, internal memos. The story was clear. My father had stolen from his own wife and her legacy. Robert objected repeatedly. Judge Holbrook overruled him every time. By the end of Helen's testimony, the courtroom was silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. The scale of deception was undeniable. After court adjourned, Douglas leaned toward me. "That testimony sealed it," he said. "He can't recover from this." I nodded. "I know. But I also knew my father. He wouldn't go quietly." That evening, I sat alone in my office, staring at the framed photo of my mother on the wall. She was smiling, holding a fabric sample, sleeves rolled up, ready to work. I whispered to the picture, "I'm getting it back, Mom. All of it." Outside, the sun sank over the desert skyline. The glass towers of downtown Phoenix glowed red in the fading light. The city kept moving, unaware that in one courtroom, a decades-long illusion of power was falling apart. The next morning, the papers called it the trial that could redefine business ethics in Arizona. They were right. This was no longer just about ownership. It was about justice, accountability, and a woman's promise to defend her mother's name. And for the first time, I believed I could actually win. Robert tried to shake Helen's confidence, questioning her past and her role in my father's schemes. He mentioned her questionable accounting decisions, implying she had no moral ground to stand on. Helen didn't flinch. "Yes," she said clearly. "I helped Gregory hide money. That's exactly why my testimony matters. I know how he works. I know the systems he built to cover his lies. And I know every word he's spoken in this courtroom is false." Her honesty landed like a hammer. Even the jurors seemed taken aback. For years, Helen had helped him manipulate the books. Now, she was exposing every secret. By the fifth day, Judge Holbrook had heard enough. She called both attorneys to the bench. Her expression was unreadable. "Counsel," she said, "I am prepared to rule." Douglas and Robert returned to their tables. The courtroom went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. The judge looked directly at my father. Her tone was steady and cold. "Mr. Gregory," she began, "the evidence in this case is overwhelming. The documents, the witness testimony, and the financial records leave no room for doubt. Your late wife's will divided Summit Textile Company equally between you and your daughter. You have violated that order repeatedly and intentionally." She picked up a set of papers and held them for emphasis. "The forged loan documents are among the most serious examples of misconduct I have seen in a civil case. You used your daughter's forged signature to secure financing, placing the company's assets at risk. That alone demonstrates a level of deceit incompatible with your claims of good faith." My father didn't move. His face was blank, his hands still. Judge Holbrook continued. "The hidden accounts, the false partnerships, the shell companies, all point to a consistent pattern of deception. You have shown contempt for the law, for your wife's wishes, and for your daughter's rights." She paused for a moment, then spoke with finality. "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Julia is awarded full ownership of Summit Textile Company. You are ordered to transfer all shares and surrender any claim to company assets within 30 days. Additionally, you will pay restitution for funds misappropriated from the company. The exact amount will be determined through a forensic accounting audit." Douglas placed a steady hand on my shoulder. I couldn't speak. Relief mixed with disbelief. For months, I had fought for this moment. Now it was real. But Judge Holbrook wasn't finished. Her voice sharpened. This court is also referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office with a recommendation for criminal prosecution. Your conduct in this case has been reprehensible. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck once. My father stood slowly. He looked across the room at me. His eyes were tired, almost empty. For a second, I thought he might speak. Instead, he turned and walked out. His lawyer followed, papers clutched in hand, moving fast to keep up. Douglas smiled. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," I replied. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Reporters called my name, shouting questions. Douglas spoke for us. He gave a short statement about justice, integrity, and the importance of honoring legal obligations. I said nothing. The truth didn't need a speech. The weeks that followed moved fast. I took full control of Summit Textile and started rebuilding. Patricia became operations manager, a promotion she had earned years ago. I hired a new chief financial officer with a clean record and strong ethics. The company's books were reopened and cleaned line by line. I called every client personally. I explained what had happened, told them about the court ruling, and asked for another chance. Some agreed immediately. Others wanted to wait. A few refused entirely. I accepted their decisions and kept moving forward. Suppliers who had once demanded payment in advance began extending credit again. Word spread that Summit was under new leadership. The company's reputation was slowly recovering. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation against my father grew larger. Federal prosecutors joined the case when the bribery trail crossed state lines. Wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering. Each week brought new charges. Veronica, his girlfriend, issued a public statement denying any involvement. She said she had been deceived just like everyone else. No one believed her, and she vanished from his life soon after. Judge Whitmore wasn't so lucky. He pled guilty to corruption and received 3 years in federal prison plus permanent disbarment. His son got 2 years for his role in falsifying documents. The case became a national story, a warning about the dangers of power, greed, and compromise. 4 months later, my father went on trial in criminal court. I attended every day. I sat in the back row, away from the press, watching him face what he had spent his life avoiding: accountability. The prosecution built a precise case: financial records, recorded phone calls, testimony from former partners. Helen returned to the stand, describing how he had manipulated transactions to hide money overseas. The evidence was airtight. His defense team tried every strategy. They claimed he was unaware of certain transfers. They said Helen was unreliable. They argued he was the victim of political bias. None of it mattered. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge reviewed the crimes: bribery, wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. "You used your influence for personal gain," he said. "You damaged not only those close to you, but also public trust in the institutions you corrupted." He paused, then delivered the sentence. 8 years in federal prison. I didn't celebrate. I just sat still, watching him as the reality settled over him. For the first time, my father looked small. Not angry, not defiant, just hollow. His lawyers filed appeals, but each was denied. Weeks later, I was in my office at Summit when Douglas called. "The last appeal was rejected," he said. "He's going to serve the full term." "Thank you," I said softly, then hung up. I sat for a while, staring at the framed photo of my mother on the wall. She was laughing, her hair tied back, a fabric sample in one hand. I thought about everything she had built and everything he had almost destroyed. He had betrayed her trust, his marriage, his business, and his own daughter. But he hadn't won. The company survived. Her legacy endured. And for the first time, in years, I felt peace. Not joy, not revenge, just quiet certainty that justice had finally caught up to him. I had stopped him. The business he tried to destroy was alive again. Summit Textile was recovering faster than anyone expected. Within months, we had regained 3 of our lost clients and signed contracts with 2 new ones. Orders were flowing in. The factory floor buzzed with energy. The employees worked with renewed purpose. Patricia told me it felt like the early days when my mother was in charge, when everyone believed in what they were building. That sense of pride was back. People cared again. They stayed late, not because they had to, but because they wanted to see the company succeed. I created a scholarship in my mother's name for young women studying textile manufacturing and business management. It was a way to give back, to pass forward what she had built. The first recipient was a 20-year-old student from Tucson. She reminded me of myself at that age, ambitious and relentless. Seeing her reminded me that my mother's legacy wasn't only in fabric or numbers, but in people. 6 months after the trial, I stood in the same factory my mother had opened 20 years earlier. The machines hummed in steady rhythm, producing the fabrics that would soon cover tables and windows in restaurants and hotels across the Southwest. The smell of cotton and dye filled the air. Workers moved with precision, each motion practiced, confident, proud. Patricia walked up beside me, a clipboard in hand. "We did good this month," she said with a small smile. "Profit margins are up. Employee satisfaction is higher than it's been in years. Your mother would be amazed at what you've done." I shook my head. "I just fixed what was broken," she smiled again. "You did more than that. You saved this place. You didn't just preserve her legacy, you brought it back to life." Her words stayed with me long after she walked away. I looked out at the floor, at the rows of machines, at the people who believed again in what we were doing. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was a promise fulfilled. My father was serving his sentence in a federal prison in Texas. He had lost everything: his wealth, his reputation, his power. He would be 70 when he got out if he served the full term. The man who had once commanded attention in every room now lived by the same rules as everyone else. No favors, no shortcuts. I thought about Judge Whitmore, too. Once respected, now disbarred and imprisoned. His name had become shorthand for corruption in Arizona legal circles. Pulling a Whitmore meant trying to fix a case and getting caught. Both he and my father had spent years manipulating others, convinced they were untouchable. Now both were reminders that no one is beyond consequence. I often thought about all the people my father had deceived over the years. The partners he cheated, the employees he discarded, the investors he misled. Many of them had reached out to me since the verdict. Some apologized for believing his lies. Others just wanted to tell me they admired what I had done. I didn't hold grudges. I had learned that resentment consumes energy better spent on rebuilding. Mostly, though, I thought about my mother. About how she would have handled all of this. She had been strong but kind, disciplined but forgiving. She believed that integrity was strength. I hadn't fought with her softness, but I had fought with her courage. She used to tell me, "There's a difference between silence and peace. Silence lets injustice breathe. Peace is what follows when truth wins." It had taken years to understand what she meant. I understood it now. I had learned that justice isn't easy. It requires endurance. It means standing up when every force around you tells you to stay down. It means speaking when silence feels safer. I had fought for my mother's memory, for fairness, and for my own voice. The journey had been brutal. But standing in that factory, hearing the steady rhythm of the machines, I knew every sleepless night had been worth it. My father spent the next 8 years in a world that didn't bend to charm or influence. Inside those walls, no one cared about his name or his wealth. The guards ignored his charisma. The inmates didn't care about his history. He was just another man in a uniform, following rules he couldn't rewrite. His assets were liquidated to pay restitution. The cars, the properties, the accounts, all gone. His name, once powerful in business circles, became a stain no one wanted to touch. The people who had once invited him to charity galas and private dinners now avoided him. He had become invisible, a ghost of his own creation. When I read about him in the paper, a short paragraph buried deep in the business section, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, just a quiet finality. I had built something new, something clean. Summit Textile thrived under my leadership not because I was ruthless, but because I valued people the way my mother had. We prioritized craftsmanship and reliability. We earned every contract through merit, not manipulation. I made sure every employee was treated with respect. I knew every name on the factory floor. I knew who had kids in school, who was saving for a house, who was taking night classes. It mattered. That connection was what my mother had built her company on, and it became the foundation of mine. We began exporting to neighboring states. Our client base expanded beyond Arizona. A magazine did a feature calling Summit Textile a model of ethical family business recovery. I didn't care much for publicity, but I knew she would have been proud. Each morning when I walked through the office doors, I felt her presence. Her framed photo hung above the main staircase, the same smile she'd had in life, the one that made people trust her. I liked to think she saw what I'd done. The girl who had once sat in that courtroom feeling powerless had become a woman who reclaimed everything taken from her. Sometimes, late at night, I thought back to that first moment when everything began. The 2 words I whispered as I realized the depth of my father's corruption. Whitmore Advisory. Those words had been my starting point, the key that opened the truth. Revenge, I learned, isn't about destruction. It's about truth. And truth, when used with precision, cuts deeper than any weapon. It exposes. It restores. It liberates. My father's empire was built on lies. Mine was rebuilt on truth. That was the difference between him and me. As I left the factory that evening, I stopped at the door and looked back. The lights glowed across the production floor, illuminating rows of fabric, color, and motion. It looked alive again. My mother's legacy was no longer a memory. It was present, vibrant, thriving. And I finally understood that justice isn't found in a courtroom. It's found in what you do after the verdict, in how you rebuild, and in who you choose to become. That was the real victory.